Hello, and thank you once again for joining me on the Arguably Awesome podcast. Today, with me as ever, is one of my best companions, alcohol. Today, I'm drinking a Dead Guy Ale by Rogue. Very tasty. Not super high on the ABV, about 6.8% alcohol content. But that's not what we came here to talk about. Today, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite novels, and that's, or not novels, but series of novels. That's going to be the Vampire novels by Anne Rice. Unfortunately, she did recently, well, not recently, but she did pass not very long ago. May she rest in peace. And she made one of, in my personal opinion, like a really eccentric and just like stellar series of books about these preternatural creatures, the romanticism of vampirism, and with Anne Rice having deep ties to the Catholic Church at various points in her career, and you'll definitely see some themes dealing with like theology and our characters kind of like dealing with being creatures of the night and struggling with their faith, because some of them did come from time periods where faith was a really big part of people's everyday, to do. At this point, I'm just going to go ahead and pull up the first book that started it all, and that's going to be The Interview with the Vampire. Now, if you haven't seen it, there is a movie based off of this as well, and that's going to be starring Brad Pitt. You've got Tom Cruise, Kirsten Dunst. I believe Antonio Banderas plays a vampire in it at one point. There's so many different faces attached to this project, but the gist of it, without giving a whole lot away, is, it's pretty on the nose with the title. A man back in, I want to say the 80s time period, ends up meeting with a vampire. The titular character of the series, even. I want to say no. Meets with Louise. Now, the main character, you could argue, is Lestat. There's definitely, after the first one, a lot of books centered on that character, but Anne Rice does branch off once or twice talking about other characters in the series. But Louise is one of Lestat's first creations when it comes to like birthing children in the blood. And he ends up meeting this reporter and decides, I'm just going to go ahead and tell all, ooh, vampire expose, so to speak. And he starts telling his story about how he, met Lestat years and years and years, like hundreds of years ago, and how he ended up being turned by him and walking down this bloody path through the Savage Garden. And that's another reference from the pages, if you will. If you look it up, it's quite interesting. Love how she describes it in the book. But Interview with the Vampire, you had people like the Cincinnati Enquirer calling it a bona fide blockbuster. Freaking Chicago Tribune called it unrelentingly erotic. Sometimes beautiful and always unforgettable. And that's the thing with Anne Rice's books, is I mentioned the romanticism of being a vampire. Is she really likes to involve her preternatural species in some sort of like intimate act, it goes beyond, like, at first it starts just like characters would simply have feelings of love for each other, this deep love. And from there, Anne Rice had to get really creative with it. For instance, her characters don't necessarily have the ability to reproduce through stereotypical means, with their with their cock and balls, basically, is what I'm trying to say. That stuff doesn't work like how it works for humans. And so the way that they procreate is through, the turning of people through blood. And even still, Anne Rice had to make that all, super passionate, like the way they're biting each other's necks. Oh, which kind of got her in some hot water with some people because they felt like she was basically writing like erotica, and I guess you could technically call it vampire erotica, but I mean, what's wrong with that? Vampires can't be sexy too. Anyways, where the book ends up leaving off, we start to switch more into like the viewpoint of our main character, and that's when you see that transition in the vampire Lestat. Now, the vampire Lestat is strictly from his point of view, and this is like his record to the world to try and set it straight. There's some things that he doesn't agree with from Louise's telltale. Basically, he doesn't agree with how Louise put the story out, and decides that he's gonna tell his own tale. I love how this is such an old book, but it's already saying from the author of Tales of the Body Snatcher, which is like the fourth book, the Body Thief, excuse me. Now, what I really liked about the interviews with vampires, like where the last one ended off, not to sit here and spoil, but if you're listening to this, I should have already said that, but there's going to be major spoilers, so just be aware. But the thing I like about this is at the end of the first one, Lestat was so brokenhearted by everything that had gone down that he decides to, basically just bury himself in the dirt and rest. And so he does for a few decades up until 1980 something, where like the sound of a guitar, I guess, basically rises him out of the ground. You know what? I might be confusing the end of Vampire Lestat with Queen of the Damned, but it's the next book in the series, so it blurs just a little bit. Let me see. Let me just go ahead and read the back of it for you, just so you understand. Lestat, the vampire hero of Anne Rice's enthralling new novel, is a creature of the darkest and richest imagination. Once an aristocrat, in the heady days of pre-revolutionary France, now a rock star in the demonic shimmering 1980s, he rushes through the centuries in search of others like him, seeking answers to the mystery of his eternal, terrifying existence. His is a mesmerizing story, passionate, complex, and thrilling. San Francisco Chronicles says it's a psychological, mythological sojourn, frightening, sensual. Anne Rice will live on through the ages of literature. To read her is to become giddy, as if spinning through the mind of time, to become lightheaded, as if our blood is slowly being drained away. I have always loved the character of Lestat. He reminds me a bit of myself. He calls himself the Brat Prince, and I couldn't agree more. I'm pretty bratty, and I think of myself as a prince. But he is, for all intents and purposes, an insufferable braggart. Before he was turned, he was quite the drunk, but just one of those people in life who burns with such an intense passion for life that it just caught the eye of one preternatural being. I keep saying that. I think I like the way it sounds, preternatural. And that's when his maker decides to turn him into a vampire, giving him everything in his like vault, I guess you could say. He had like a castle vault, and it had gold and tapestries and riches beyond, not beyond your wildest compare or comprehension, but definitely like an impressive amount of money, enough for him to start one of the like biggest like and oldest like estates I think I've seen in vampire novels, but I need to read a few more, honestly. But yeah, he goes from being a vampire lord in like, geez, I want to say it was like 1600s France. I mean, it's quite a long time ago, to being a rock star in the 1980s. Like that's pretty badass, I gotta say. And his look for being a rock star was perfect. Like in the book, he's more. If you watch the movie, like Interview with the Vampire, or Queen of the Damned is the one I'm thinking of. The guy they chose for Lestat, he just they could have followed maybe more of the book's lead when it came to makeup. Like for instance, the way Anne Rice describes her vampiric characters, their nails have such a shiny luster to them. It's almost like you can see through them, yet they are sharp as razors. Um, their hair has an impossible luster. If you look too long, you'll start to see something that doesn't quite seem human. Especially with the eyes. The eyes start to take on different hues and fluorescent, like not fluorescent. Basically, like Lestat's eyes. I believe they describe him at one point as having like these like crazy scarlet like eyes. But like vampires, just basically everything about them like, seems to get dramatized to the point where it's like borderline uncanny. And so humans will sometimes, if they get too long of a glimpse at them, will start to feel a little weird, like they know they're sitting next to something that's not quite human. But at first, they can be pretty enraptured with their looks, which is pretty helpful to get victims food if you're a vampire. Hmm. Anyways, I already mentioned Queen of the Damned, so we'll spin off into that now. Now, my copy of the Queen of the Damned has seen some things. You know what I'm saying? It's pretty much falling apart right on camera. Look at that. That's all that's holding it together. But I love this book because it's. I mean, if you haven't seen the movie, I keep saying that, and I'm gonna stop. It gives you more answers into vampire lore. Finally, like what we've been waiting for. In the Vampire Lestat, he's got all these questions like, how did vampires come to be? How did all this happen? Why am I here? Am I evil? Am I a product of the devil? Uh, all sorts of like really pressing questions. There's other stuff that happens in the Vampire Lestat that's like just so soul rending. I mean, it's amazing that he even survived through the ages at some points. You would say, but I'll just give you a quick synopsis. Read the back of this one real quick as well. The Vampire Chronicles, it says, a feat of mesmeric storytelling, a chilling entertainment. The Queen of the Damned unleashes Akasha, the Queen herself, who has risen from a 6,000-year sleep to let loose the powers of the night. Akasha has marvelously devised a plan to save mankind and destroy Lestat in this extraordinarily sensual novel of the complex, erotic, electrifying world of the undead. Ooh, here's the San Francisco Chronicle again. It's a wonderful web of dark side mythology that Rice weaves here, combining vampire superstition with the most mesmerizing of cultures, the ancient Egyptians. And that gives me enough here to kind of put the book down and spin off to a little synopsis. So you already know that Vampire Lestat, he wakes up, he's like, hey, I want to be a rock star. Hey, you want to be a rock star. So he does that. Well, it turns out in the Vampire Lestat, he learns a little bit of the mysteries of the world around him from another vampire named Marius. Now, Marius is a 2,000-year-old plus vampire who's been around since ancient Roman times. Like, we're talking like Inquisitions and shit. Uh, Now, he happened to become the vampiric bodyguard of pretty much the mother and father of the race of vampires, being Queen Akasha and the husband. Why does his name escape me? Anyways, I'm getting sidetracked. The point is that Marius ends up taking over the role of being their bodyguards, through the ages. He moves them across the globe because vampires still have crippling adversity to the sun. They still have all those other things like unfortunately needing to go to sleep during the day. Just kind of clicks on. You can't help it. You try to fight it, and the older you are, the stronger your blood is, and apparently the more you can fight it. But eventually your body will just like shut itself down, and the vampiric body, and they have to go into a rest. Essentially, their body like dies again while they rest, but that's a whole nother thing. So he ends up finding our dear friend Lestat at one point, and against his better judgment, takes him in to see them in the chambers and tells him about some of the history as far as he knows. And Lestat ends up stirring the queen, kind of like he plays his violin for her, and he's like doing some crazy um sonata. I want to say it was like the Devil's Waltz or something like that. He ends up playing the song for her, and at first he doesn't notice anything going on because her at this point they've got evolved to the point of just being like statues. Her and her pharaoh husband just sit there like statues, Egyptian statues made of marble. Their skin has gotten so pale and lustreless, and so lustreless. Anyways, so he does notice a change. She has now offered her hand out to him as if to say, to drink of her blood. Again, heavy um, themes in like Christianity in theology here. But he goes and he accepts the blood of the queen, much to the anger of both Marius, well, and jealousy, and the pharaoh himself, who almost destroys Lestat where he stands, but he's luckily able to flee. But Lestat, using the knowledge that he's gained in that tomb, sings a song on national TV, pretty much exposing vampires for who they are. Remember, again, this is in the dam now. And what happens next is damn near the destruction of humankind. Akasha wakes up, like actually wakes up from her stupor, drains the husband, the pharaoh, damn near almost destroys Marius on her way out, and goes to the concert where Lestat happens to be playing, and just starts causing all sorts of hell. And anyways, now I'm spending too much time on it. A bunch of vampires team up to try and stop her as she tries to make a new world order for the vampiric kind. They fear that she's bringing too much attention, like you're making it too hot. Humans are gonna, humans have always, even though we're stronger, there's always more of them, and they can hunt during the day and the night. So um, we basically posed that kind of threat. They lost certain advantages while they gained others, and they don't want to pretty much start the potential genocide of both races, which Akasha's just like, I don't give a shit. Which, I mean, it's fair. She's a queen. She's like not even like a queen, but like almost like a queen god at that point. Loving that dead guy. So, fast forward to the end of the book, and I won't really spoil it for you, but basically the destruction of mankind and vampire kind doesn't happen. So, won't go into too much detail. Oh, well, I kind of want to because it's based off of the lore of the vampires. Yeah, okay, I will touch on this part. So this is a very, very lore heavy book. At one point, we're introduced into the ancient Egyptian times to learn how Akasha became the queen of the dam. And basically, it was explained as there were souls and spirits and things like that evolved, like wrapped around like a shell of souls basically around the earth. And there were certain people who could interact with them, like shamans. And there was these two redheaded twins named Maheret, and I want to say Maquette were their names. Might be getting the second one wrong. But these two twins, they had the ability to commune and interact with spirits, which was back in their time like a sought after and feared ability. Um, at one point, their clan is destroyed, and they're brought before the queen, and I believe at that point they are sentenced to more so like torture. Um, and then, long story short, there was an evil spirit. Okay, and this spirit, he wanted to become material so bad. He wanted to have flesh. He wanted to be able to taste, to feel. And one night, there were some conspirators against the pharaoh and his queen who were successful in their plot to attack and kill them. And while the queen and the pharaoh lay bleeding on the ground, the spirit entered the queen's body and pretty much fused with her. I won't say possessed her because she still had some sort of sense of self to a point, but definitely fused with her dying flesh and caused this transformation into a vampiric being. She ended up saving her husband, slaying the would be killers, but shortly after around that time is when they needed to be protected by some sort of bodyguard or underling because they were starting to. Well, I mean, a little bit afterwards, they were starting to do that whole like statue thing where their bodies were starting to just harden up and they were more listless and lifeless, excuse me, at certain points. So they needed someone to feed them and to move them and keep them safe. Now, when the vampires try to stop the queen at the end of the book, they are aware that because of this great spirit being attached to the queen, if she were to die, like some sort of hive mind alien bullshit. I mean, I won't say bullshit, just because it's when it's used in movies, sometimes it's like cop out. But it just made the stakes higher in this one. Long story short, if they were to kill the queen, they would kill the entire vampire race. And so, what do these two redhead twins do? They do end up killing the queen, and people like the vampires can feel themselves dying. Some of them that are like lesser vampires, like say some of the newer ones that were being created in the 80s, like it was like all the rave, like oh be a vampire, like vampire biker gangs. I mean, you've got all these vampires in the 80s. You got vampires spreading like wildfire from the west coast to the east coast out in Miami. Um, Anyways, been tracking here. So they kill the queen. Everybody's like, "Oh, we're dying!" Oh. And the twins Maheret and Maketh, they have this. They come from a clan that has this ritual of eating the heart and the brain of their loved ones. Apparently, it's like where their they believe it's where the spirit resides, and so it like gives them the strength of like their ancestor spirit or something like. I can't remember the exact details, but long story short, they eat this hoe's brain and heart, and the spirit is able to pass on from her dying body into the twins. And super, super cool the way that they were able to absorb the body and the blood of the queen, almost like the body and the blood of Christ. Again, heavy ties religiously. Um, Now, another thing I did want to point out is that in the Queen of the Damned, I don't know, I really felt like Anne Rice really did her thing there, trying to give us more lore for these vampires. Like there were at the time, she was just starting with the first two books, so there wasn't a whole lot to go off as far as like what can they do, what can't they do, the upper limits of their powers, um, you know, things that they had to suffer through as far as how bad humans could get them in a hold or a bind, so to speak. And that's that book. One of my favorites. Moving on. I don't happen to have the Tale of the Body Thief. That is one that I wish I did have, but it's not my collection. That one involves a secret organization called the Talamasca, I want to say. An organization of scholars based in Britain who were started by, well, actually, I probably shouldn't spoil that just yet. But basically, they're a group who examines and observes paranormal activities, species, beast events, and documents them throughout history. And the reason why I'm bringing them up is because they play a huge part in the story. Lestat, again, being the main character, of course, goes on this huge journey. And at this point, I mean, it's been 3 books, it's been hundreds of years. He's kind of weary, right? And he's suddenly getting this feeling of like wanting to be normie, wanting to be just a regular guy. He's like, oh man, my humanity. I miss it. ah, you know, um, dismisses being a regular dude, which I think is kind of whatever. But he finds whispers of this person called the body thief. I can't really remember exactly how. But the body thief is this person who offers Lestat the release from his suffering. He tries to regain. Lestat wants to regain his lost humanity, and this thief, has pretty much picked up on that wish, those thoughts that he's like putting out there, and so they try to possess his body at first. But being a vampire, it's like your soul's like linked on an infinitesimal scale, and so it's just unless he wants to relinquish himself, he can't be forced away from his immortal coil, so to speak. But the body thief at some point is able to convince him to relinquish his immortal body, and the stock gets the classic like, oh, I don't like this actually. Never mind. I want to renege. Give me it back. I want my body back. And the body thief is like, nah. Of course he is. The and then ensues this whole journey where Lestat links up with an agent of Talamasca that he's already been familiar with by the name of David, I want to say, an older gentleman, and together they travel around tracking the body thief and trying to get his body back. Just because I'm not as super familiar with this one, I'll just give you the long story short. He gets his body back, and his buddy David even ends up getting a new body, and becomes a vampire. Hot. Yeah, so everybody's just a young hot vampire by the end of this one. Shocker. And then we can finally segue into one of my actual favoritist of Anne Rice's books, Memnoch the Devil. Now, Memnoch the Devil, as you would imagine from all this, Jesus art here. Now, this book is about how he gets his body back. He's still reeling with spirituality and things like that. It's a constant theme. He is now starting to settle back into his preternatural life when he starts kind of getting these glimpses out of the corners of his eye, like in his peripheral vision, of like demonic images and all this crazy stuff happening. And he just can't figure out what the heck is going on. He starts hearing all these whispers, a voice whispering to him, different than anything, because vampires have like the ability to already scan someone's mind, or send messages to people's minds, or listen to conversations distantly. But this voice speaking to him was something on a whole different level, almost as if the world itself were speaking to him, from my understanding of the description. Says here, in Anne Rice's extraordinary new novel, the vampire Lestat, outsider, canny monster, hero wanderer, is at last offered the chance to be redeemed. He is brought into direct confrontation with both God and the devil, and into the land of death. So, at one point, one of the visions that he's seeing ends up revealing itself to him as the devil, and offers to, from my understanding, let him lord over hell. But let's see. We'll just go ahead and skip forward here. Snatched from the world itself by the mysterious Memnoch, who claims to be the devil, he is invited to be a witness at the creation. The devil himself. I mean, I'll leave that to your imagination. You end up reading it. No, I won't. it's not. It's not really. Anyways, he's taken like the ancient prophets into the heavenly realm and is ushered into purgatory. Here, he must decide if he can believe in the devil or in God. And finally, he must decide which, if either, he will serve. In the first 4 Vampire Chronicles, Anne Rice summoned up for us worlds that are fantastic and distant, making them as resonant, real, and immediate as our own. Now in her most daring and darkest novel, she takes us, with Lestat, into the mythical world that is most important to us, into the realms of our own theology. Now, as somebody who has been raised in the church and, I won't say had things necessarily controlled, but definitely wasn't allowed to ingest certain things at certain ages. I would say that the Memnoch the Devil is such a delightful expansion on the story of creation and of the Passion of the Christ. At one point, our character meets and drinks of the blood of Christ. Amazing. Such a huge journey this book is. And when he eventually does make it back, he has an artifact with him, which I believe was described as the Veil of Veronica. A veil of uh, textile, some sort of fabric that was wiped against the face of Jesus himself during the Passion and perfectly carries his visage on the item. That event apparently is so shocking to Armand, one of the other vampires who survived during religious times, and was heavy into Catholicism um, back before. He loses his ever loving mind and tries to send himself into the sun to burn to death. Leading us into The Vampire Armand, released in 1998, just 3 years later. And now, Armand is one of the creations of Marius. And in this book, you get to learn more of the backstory and history of Armand. It's the sixth book in the Chronicles of the Vampire Chronicles, excuse me, and it is one of my favorites. Again, it's I keep saying one of my favorites, one of my favorites, one of my favorites, but I'll definitely say Memnoch is up there, the top, near tippy top. But Armand is a close second. I mean, he just has such a rich tale of suffering. I mean, this poor guy, he goes through the ringer. It's just nice to kind of get more of the story that we didn't get to experience with him, including like how he came to be in Marius's company, what happened when him and Marius eventually ended up separating, and how that came to be, his eventual vampirification, and how he survived through the ages. So many things to go through, like how he was absorbed by a vampiric religious cult. I mean, he went through so much stuff. I mean, even before then, she tells a really deep tale of the origins of this guy. Um, I'll just go ahead and spoil it for you. He survives the burning because he's just that strong. He's that old. His blood is that strong. He just, you know, could not die. um, Not too much more to say about that book, so I'll just go ahead and move on to the next one in the series, which came out in the year 2000, and that would be Merrick. Now, if I remember correctly, Merrick is the story of the Mayfair witches. So not only do we have vampires in these novels, but we have witches as well. And it's actually pretty cool to see how they build this rich culture off of like African and French, like voodoo, out in New Orleans, and how all of that kind of comes into play with like the Talamasca and David Talbot's character, and how that all comes into play with like Lestat and all the other vampiric characters we've already seen, and just kind of sets up some pretty cool things in the future of the series regarding like other immortals, the blending of like magic with vampirism, and I thought it was a pretty decent tale. Not really one of my favorites per se, but not a bad one. After that, we've got 2001's Blood and Gold. Now she's pumping them out a lot quicker. That one, just a year after. Um, let's see here. Rice writes with her usual erotic and historically evocative flair. This one starts out, once a proud senator in imperial Rome, Marius is kidnapped and forced into the dark realm of blood, where he is made a protector of the queen and king of the vampires, in whom the core of the supernatural race resides, as I told you. Through his eyes, we see the fall of pagan Rome to the Emperor Constantine, the horrific sack of the Eternal City at the hands of the Visigoths, and the vile aftermath of the Black Death. Ultimately restored by the beauty of the Renaissance, Marius becomes a painter, living dangerously yet happily among mortals, and giving his heart to the great master Botticelli, to the bewitching courtesan Bianca, and to the mysterious young apprentice Armand. But it is in the present day, deep in the jungle, where Marius will meet his fate, seeking justice from the oldest vampires in the world. When they said difficult to put down, I will say that it definitely was. I am a very big fan of Marius, and I think that it was nice to have another book that was centered around this character. Because, I mean, what are you going to do at that point? You just kind of have to flesh out your series a bit. And that's where she was with that one. Um, again, not really too much more to say about these ones. So that leads us into 2002's Blackwood Farm. Blackwood Farm, again, definitely not one of my favorites. It was the ninth book in the series, and this has a lot of crossovers between Mayfair Witches, the vampires, and I want to say maybe not this one, but another race of characters as well. Let's see here. Oh, spirits are brought back as well. Welcome to Blackwood Farm. Soaring white columns, spacious dining rooms, sun-drenched gardens, and a dark strip of the dense Sugar Devil Swamp. This is the world of Quinn Blackwood, a brilliant young man haunted since birth by a mysterious doppelganger, a spirit known as Goblin. Why? No idea. No idea. But yeah, this dude is all like, "Oh, I can see this spirit and it looks like exactly like me." And eventually it gets to the point where like it can draw enough, I guess you could say, molecules to itself if you want to think scientifically for a moment, to make itself material enough for him to, like, I think either they had sex or they kissed or whatever. Basically, you mean to tell me this spirit character is like absorbs all this like stuff out of the atmosphere to have sex with this dude? Like, come on. I like you, Anne, but I love you, Anne, but what was going on there? When Quinn is made a vampire, losing all that is rightfully his and gaining an unwanted immortality, Goblin becomes even more vampiric and terrifying than Quinn himself. Yes, his spirit character evolves with him when he makes the change through the kiss. Yeah, no, it's a different movie. Through the dark kiss, the bloody gift, if you will. Um, which kind of just makes the spirit stronger, which really isn't that great for anybody. His name's Goblin. Quinn seeks out the legendary vampire Lestat in the hope of freeing himself from the specter that draws him inexorably back to Sugar Devil Swamp and to the secrets it holds. Spine tingling and suspenseful, says the Charlotte Observer. You know, Rice sharpening her gothic vibes. I would say it was still a pretty good book. It was definitely a little thicker than some of the last ones. There was a part though where this how do I say this? Hmm, how do I say this? So at one point, Quinn is turned into a vampire by drinking the blood. They forced the blood of a vampire through their cock. And I gotta be honest, that I almost put down the book at that point. I was like, whoa. And not even like in a sensual way. So I was just kind of like, that's a little much for me. But I mean, I still finished it, and it was all right. I mean, you see Merrick again, and you see Louise, and like some people are brought back together after quite some time, so pretty cool. Oh, my dear Rice, she just passed just last year. So sad. May she rest in peace. Okay, so after Blackwood Farm, we've got 2003's Blood Canticle. Now, Blood Canticle pretty much like ended it there um, for quite some time. Another New York Times bestseller, as you can see by the book cover there. Beautiful. Anyways, I'll go ahead and read the back here for you. Surrounded by its brooding swampscape, Blackwood Farm is alive with the comings and goings of the bewitched and the bewitching. Among them is the ageless vampire Lestat, vainglorious enough to believe that he can become a saint, weak enough to fall impossibly in love. Gripped by his unmistakable desire for the mortal Rowan Mayfair, and taking the not-so-innocent, new-to-the-blood Mona Mayfair under his wing, Lestat braves the wrath of how do you say that? Patrifamilias? Oh, man. Anyways, basically Daddy Mayfair, Julian. And then he ventures to a private island off the coast of Haiti. There, Saint Lestat will get his chance to slay his dragon. For Mona and the Mayfair share an explosive secret blood blonde. Blood blonde? Wow. Anyways, blood bond to another deathless species, a 5,000-year-old race of Taltos, strangers held in the throes of evil itself. Seductive, Rice draws on the most tantalizing pieces of past novels and books and weaves them artfully into a revolutionary ending. Sorry, there's a Goodwill sticker on the back. I can't read it all. So, but yes, we take place back in Blackwood Farm for a little bit, where so Mona Mayfair, excuse me, is somebody who I believe ends up falling in love with our dear boy Quinn Blackwood, and him and her pretty much are like now a thing, and they eventually turn this witch into a vampire. Now, Lestat has now fallen in love with another member of their family. Shocker. He falls in love with everybody. Each and everybody. I swear to you. I kid you not. Lestat is the most fallen in lovingness person. Falls in love with the concept of love itself. But, long story short, they all have to come together to try and stop this other ancient race, the one I've been mentioning for a minute, called the Taltos. I will be honest, I do not super remember much about the Taltos, except for they were just like this random race that like you know their immortality wasn't perfect, and I believe that this book had a lot of science fiction going on, like a lot of like blood tests, this and that, then people trying to discern by modern man's means what was actually happening with these vampires, which is fair. Really interesting actually to see them try to dig into what was going on there with the physiology of the vampires. And then we jump 9 years later to 2014 with Prince Lestat by Anne Rice. I bought this one from Powell's Books out here, national bestseller. Um, really, really loved it. Synopsis for this one here. Old vampires, roused from deep slumber in the earth, are doing the bidding of a voice commanding that they indiscriminately burn their kin in cities across the globe, from Paris to Mumbai, Hong Kong to San Francisco. Left with little time to spare, a host of familiar characters, including Louise de Pontdulac, Armand, and even the vampire Lestat, must embark on a journey to discover who or what is driving this mysterious being. Oh, it's a really good novel, and this one, since it's a little bit more recent, I kind of don't want to spoil too much about it. But I mean, they do a really good job of tying a lot of loose ends up, leaving some space for new questions and new entries in the book series. And I thought that it was pretty impressive, honestly. I liked what she did with the series. I will admit that that is the last one that I ended up reading. I guess there was another one, Prince Lestat in the Realm of Atlantis. I almost felt like I read that one. It was back in 2016. Um, might have purchased it on Google Play Books. I feel like I remember reading it, but I mean, the books, the novels started getting a little um, out there after a certain point. And you're just kind of like, whoa, the Realm of Atlantis, really? Tell me. Uh, I still might need to learn a little bit more about that one, to be completely honest with you. See if there's any synopsis here. Let's see, horror novel by Anne Rice, 12th in the series, first person and third person narrative. Yeah, that's usually what she likes to do. Um, let's see, ambitious rich vampire novel, vision and power. The indomitable hero returns. Hmm. Yeah, and then there's another one released in 2018, a little bit before, like a few years before she unfortunately passed away, called Blood Communion: A Tale of Prince Lestat. Um, Now I'm assuming that that was meant to be more things. I mean, if she's talking about a tale, um, but it is the 13th and last book in the series so far. I don't know if her son Christopher Rice, who has, from my understanding, helped on a few books, I do not believe that he is planning on continuing the series at the moment. Before her passing, she was talking about doing a television series because, the book had inspired some movies, but they didn't really get to finish telling the episodic tale. And I feel like there's definitely more that could have been done there for sure. I still have no idea. Actually, since I'm on the internet, is there a Vampire Chronicles TV show? AMC snagged the rights to two of the late author's supernatural series. Oh, AMC snagged the rights to Vampire Chronicles and the Lives of the Mayfair Witches back in sometime this year. Wow, okay. So, I mean, it could be possible. It could be very, very possible. You have to keep tuned in with Christopher Rice and just look online and keep tapped in, or keep looking here on the Arguably Awesome podcast. I try and keep you folks tapped in about that. I love this book series. I love vampires. Um, and I have no problem with people telling stories about creatures of the night getting sexy. I mean, what's wrong with that? Nothing wrong with that. Completely honest with you. I loved that she still made ties to religions and theology, and not even in like super like be a Christian kind of way, but just like exploring what somebody who was a devout Christian and then happens to turn into what's stereotypically considered a creature of the night, how they would handle that. I mean, we see, like I said earlier, Armand joins a cult, not purposefully. I mean, he's captured, but um, there's other vampires out there that believe, the whole burning when a cross touches you, or you know, yada yada yada, all the religious superstitions, and just watching people have their faith shaken. As somebody who's kind of gone through something like that myself, it was kind of interesting to see, even if it was from the you know dramatic angle of being like a vampire. I haven't always had problems. Just it came to me at times when I needed it. It was the kind of stories that helped me to fall in love with New Orleans, the idea of New Orleans, and I mean Granted, the time periods they're talking about are not necessarily like good times for Black people to have been around, but at the same time, there is sort of a beauty to like some of the architecture and some of the things like that. All the French being used, um, but I mean, yeah, there's reference to like slavery and stuff. It doesn't seem like vampires are super keen on slavery. I don't know. Some of them don't seem super awesome about it. Thanks again for checking me out here on the Arguably Awesome podcast. I have had a blast talking to you about one of my favorite book series of all time. And I can't wait to get together with A.CARD so we can start doing some interviews, folks. We're trying to get our schedules hammered out, but it's taking a little bit of time. You just got to bear with us. Anyways, I'm out. I got the rest of this beer and another one to finish, and I do appreciate your time. Thanks again.